Welcome to Lesson 12 of the coursework write-up lessons. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to create the design section of your project write-up. In this lesson, I'll go through all the parts that make up the design section, and I'll explain how to write up each part of the design section to get the highest marks you can. We'll also talk about what happens to your design section if you later expand or improve your project. The first thing I want to say is that your project design does not have to be simple, even if your work so far is quite simple. Your project design can be aspirational. By that I mean it can be something that you are working towards, and it's fine if it's got more features in than your project does at the moment. In fact, it's fine if your design has features that you never manage to achieve in your full work. You can write about that in the evaluation that you do at the very end. So don't be held back from creating a design that you really like, even if you don't fully manage to realise it. However, if you're not happy doing this, it is fine to start with a very simple design section and come back and add to it later on as you get a better idea of what you want your final project to look like. It's up to you, whatever allows you free rein to relax and write what you want. So now I'm going to go through the 5 sections and talk about what you have to put into each section. What I suggest you do is to create a Word document with 5 subheadings with those names that I've just told you, or similar names that suit you. Then you can come back to the Word document and fill in something under each one of those subheadings. That way you'll know you won't forget anything. So I'm going to give you a chance now to pause the video and go and make the design section as a Word document. Later on you can copy and paste it into your project write-up. So now I'm going to go through those 5 sections one by one, telling you what belongs in each section. The first section is decomposition. This is very important. It will influence the rest of your design section, and your project code development should reflect the structure of subsections that you decide at this point. So think carefully about it. Thinking about all your overall project, what are the parts, procedures, functions or methods that you need to include so that your project does everything that you hope that it will do. For example, if it's a game with moving parts, do you have subsections that will create the background, that will allow the user to move the sprite about, that will control the interaction between sprites, that will set the win conditions? All of these are typical subsections. If you're not clear and you're one of my students, come and talk to me about it. You've already created at least one prototype, so what are the sections and subsections of that prototype? So list them all with a suitable name and explain the purpose of each one. A sentence or two to explain what that subsection will do. Remember, you can base it entirely on the work that you've already created, or it can be aspirational with extra subsections that you are hoping to write in the future. Secondly, show how these subsections fit together. Are any of them repeated in a loop? Is there a branching structure in your program? You might like to use a flow chart for this, but you can describe it in words or use any other method that suits you. The third part is also based on the decomposition. Write a short algorithm that matches each of those parts of your program. You could use a flowchart again, or write the algorithm in pseudocode, or even write it using Python, as long as it's clear what the processing is that happens in each subsection. You can leave out all the code that makes Tkinter work, for example, or Pygame, or anything else that is purely presentational, that just controls the user interface. We'll look at that in the next section. So, to recap, you should have a little paragraph for each one of your subsections, and in that paragraph you should explain the processing, setting it out as an algorithm. So in the last section you didn't talk about the interface or purely presentational code. We deal with that now. Do a drawing of the design of your main screen and any other important screens in your program, and scan that in and use it in your project write-up. Or you could use some kind of graphics program to create the interface and drop that in. Don't do a screenshot of your actual interface, show the design that underlines it, and then write next to it, like you do with everything, write some explanations. Explain what's good about your design and how you're helping the user to make use of your program. And now we're on to the final section. You need to list all the key variables used in your program. By key variable, I mean the variables that store and transmit values. Don't worry about things like the counter variable of a loop or small temporary variables that you're using to make your algorithms work. I suggest you create a table something like this, or you could create a different table for each subsection, or if you're using object-oriented programming, you could create a table for each object which lists the attributes of that object. In any case, I would say what subsection you're talking about, the names of the key variables in that subsection, and the purpose of each one of those variables. I think it's also a good idea to say what data type the variable is and whether it's a global or a local variable or a parameter or whatever it is that you're doing. Okay, so that shouldn't actually take you that long. And remember that you can leave out minor variables. And the final section of your design write-up is to mention the validation that you have used or that you're going to use. Validation only applies obviously to input variables, particularly variables that are going to be typed in by the user. In other cases, you're controlling the input in a different way and you would write about that instead. For instance, if you've got a GUI, then the user might provide input entirely by clicking on mouse buttons or choosing from a drop-down menu. In any case, explain how you have controlled the user input to prevent the user from crashing your program. Remember, it's aspirational, so write about validation even if you haven't implemented it yet. That concludes all the parts that you have to write for your design section. It's 5 parts, and I would aim to write a page or so for each one of those parts. Some will be more, some will be less, but that's roughly what you should be aiming at. If it's more, of course, that's great. Now, to get decent marks, you have to make sure that your design covers all parts of your program, at least. You should also give reasons for your choices. Why have you used object-oriented programming? Why have you designed the interface like that? So obviously that will be unique to you, but explain your thinking. And for the best marks of all your choices should be justified in relation to your overall aim. For example, if your program is designed for very little children, a lot of the things that you've done in designing your program will be all about making it suitable for little kids. But again, it really depends on you. This is where your unique thinking comes to the fore. Try to cover as much of this as you can in your design. Now, I've said already that your design section could be aspirational. That is, you could create a very fancy design which your eventual project doesn't fully live up to. That is absolutely fine. You will not be marked down for it. But you might create a quite simple design and end up making a project that is fancier than your original thinking, and that is also absolutely fine. Here are some things that you can do if your project grows bigger than your original design. You can go back to the design section and extend it by adding extra notes or adding improvements that you've thought of later. Or you could create a new mini design halfway through your project and just drop that in to show how, oh, halfway through I decided to change the design and here is my new design. That's absolutely fine as well. One thing I would say is don't delete your old work. Even if you end up completely changing how, for instance, how your interface works, keep your old one, show your new one, and explain why you've made that change. This is gold dust. It shows how you're thinking, you're reflecting, you're working to improve at all times. And it just shows how much hard work you've done. So my rule of thumb is don't delete any of your old work. Include it in there, even if you ended up totally changing the way that your project works. Okay. So by doing this, you should end up with quite a nice full write-up. To recap, it should include the decomposition of your overall project into smaller subsections, the structure, which is how those different subsections fit together to make your overall project, short algorithms showing what processing goes on inside each of those subsections, a design for your interface, and a list of all your key variables with information about validation of any inputs. I'm thinking a minimum of 5 pages. Your next step is obviously to create the design section. It must suit your project, so I can't tell you exactly what to write, but aim for the best possible marks for showing your thinking and explaining your choices. I want to see this by the end of October. That is, you have the whole of the half-term holiday to work on this. So I'll look forward to seeing these when you hand them in early November. Bye for now.